Haruchika Ishizuki is a self-proclaimed love master. He knows everything about romance and understands the psychology behind making girls fall in love. After putting in so much effort, he finally reached the moment he had been waiting for. He confessed his feelings to Kiriyama, reached out his hand, and asked her to go out with him. His heart was racing. Then, out of nowhere, a strong gust of wind swept across the rooftop. The moment Haruchika opened his eyes, everything had changed. Kiriyama was gone. The rooftop had disappeared. Confused, he quickly looked around and realized he was standing in a completely different place. Just moments ago, he had been on the school rooftop. Now, he had no idea where he was. He repeatedly called out for Kiriyama, trying to understand what was happening. Before he could figure it out, someone suddenly appeared behind him. The unexpected welcome left him completely confused. Floating before him was a beautiful woman, accompanied by a tiny fairy-like girl with wings. After confirming that he was Haruchika Ishizuki, the mysterious woman introduced herself as the goddess of Clementine. The unbelievable introduction only left Haruchika even more stunned. Without wasting any time, the goddess revealed that she had a favor to ask him. But there was one problem. Refusing wasn't an option. Haruchika immediately lost his temper and demanded to know if she was responsible for dragging him there. She calmly admitted that everything was her doing. That answer only made him even angrier. He had been in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime confession, and she had interrupted it without hesitation. The goddess couldn't care less. She simply assured him that as long as he fulfilled her request, she would send him back. Meanwhile, the fairy tried to calm the situation, but Haruchika couldn't hide his frustration. He found it hard to believe that he could simply return to the exact moment he had been confessing. The goddess confidently insisted that doubting a goddess was almost disrespectful. With no other choice, Haruchika finally asked what she actually wanted from him. The answer caught him completely off guard. She wanted him to save the world. The request sounded absurd. Fortunately, she quickly explained that she wasn't asking him to defeat the Demon King. That battle had already ended just last week. That only confused Haruchika even more. The goddess then revealed another shocking truth. The Demon King would revive again in just 30 days. The fairy confirmed it without hesitation, leaving Haruchika stunned once again. According to the goddess, the next generation's hero party was already destined to defeat him when that time came. The fairy pointed out that she could have explained it better, so the goddess corrected herself and continued. Before dying, the Demon King had cast one final curse. It was nothing more than a cruel game fueled by spite. The goddess brushed it off as a childish act against her, but the fairy reminded her that the Demon King had already gone through hundreds of cycles of revival and defeat. From that perspective, the bitterness was at least understandable. Even after hearing all of that, Haruchika still couldn't see what any of it had to do with him. That's when the goddess finally revealed the real problem. 30 years from now, another hero party was supposed to defeat the revived Demon King. But the Demon King had stolen the ability to fall in love from the 7 girls who were destined to become the mothers of those future heroes. Haruchika could only stare in disbelief. The goddess immediately grew irritated by his reaction. Without love, there would be no marriage. Without marriage, those future heroes would never be born. The fairy quickly stepped in and helped calm the goddess before she continued. To restore the 7 girls' ability to love, she had summoned someone from another world. That someone was Haruchika Ishizuki, the ultimate romance expert. The Sage of Love. The one she believed was the true master of love. Haruchika froze for a moment. The title of Love Master caught him completely off guard. The goddess had already called him that before, but he still couldn't believe she was talking about him. Embarrassed by the ridiculous title, he questioned why he had been dragged into such a troublesome situation in the first place. To him, this was the worst kind of bad luck. The goddess then turned to the fairy, whose name was Jibril. Even Jibril wasn't completely convinced. She questioned whether Haruchika was really the right person, admitting that she couldn't sense any aura worthy of a love master. Looking at him, she found it hard to believe anyone would actually fall for such an unreliable guy. The goddess quickly reminded her that she had been the one who insisted Haruchika was the perfect choice. Hearing that, Haruchika adjusted his tie with confidence before casually calling the goddess useless. That instantly irritated her. Instead of backing down, Haruchika explained that while he had mastered countless theories about romance, winning over someone like her would actually be difficult. In his experience, truly beautiful women were much easier to charm. The unexpected claim completely confused the goddess. Haruchika refused to explain it directly and instead looked toward Jibril for support. She immediately refused to get involved. The goddess couldn't believe he was talking as if he could actually prove it. Haruchika simply smirked. Without warning, he stepped right in front of the goddess until only a tiny distance separated their faces. The sudden move caught her completely by surprise. She instinctively tried to pull away, but Haruchika continued holding her attention while staring directly into her eyes. The goddess became increasingly uncomfortable and urged him to stop staring. She even tried to downplay her own beauty, but Haruchika calmly insisted that her beauty was exactly why she was so easy to charm. Little by little, her composure began to crack. Her heartbeat started racing. Haruchika still refused to break eye contact. As the silence stretched on, the goddess could no longer respond. A faint blush appeared across her face. Then her legs finally gave out beneath her. Watching her collapse, Haruchika quietly admitted that he might have pushed things a little too far. Jibril stood there in complete amazement. She couldn't believe someone had managed to affect the goddess herself and immediately wondered what kind of technique Haruchika had used. According to him, it wasn't anything magical. It was simply a psychological trick. He explained that every relationship has its own natural personal distance. If a complete stranger suddenly invaded that space, people would instinctively reject it. Jibril pointed out that such behavior would usually be considered far worse than just uncomfortable. Haruchika agreed. That was exactly why he first provoked the goddess until she unconsciously moved closer on her own. Then he used that momentum to enter her personal space naturally. By itself, that would only make him seem like an intruder. The real trick came after that. He maintained perfect eye contact while carefully matching the rhythm of her breathing. According to Haruchika, lovers naturally spend long periods looking into each other's eyes, and as they stay together, their breathing gradually falls into the same rhythm. He intentionally recreated that exact physical state, making her body subconsciously recognize him as someone emotionally close. Jibril could hardly believe such a technique was even possible. Haruchika admitted it wasn't easy. Synchronizing another person's breathing so quickly required an enormous amount of practice. Once the body accepted the illusion, the heart rate naturally increased. The brain then released chemicals associated with romantic attraction, making emotional resistance much weaker. At that point, even an ordinary voice could feel as comforting as someone deeply familiar. Jibril was left completely amazed by the explanation. Meanwhile, Haruchika quietly thought that if things hadn't worked on the goddess, he could have simply gone home. Instead, she had been surprisingly easy to read. In his mind, she was nothing more than a hopelessly useless goddess. Jibril could only stare in amazement. Now she finally understood why Haruchika had earned the title of Love Master. Meanwhile, the goddess was still half asleep. Taking the opportunity, Haruchika asked about the 7 girls she had mentioned earlier. He wanted confirmation that once he completed the mission, she would send him back. Still drowsy, the goddess agreed without hesitation. That promise was all Haruchika needed. After all, he had sacrificed everything to master the art of romance for one reason alone. He only wanted to confess his feelings to Kiriyama. He had finally reached that moment, and all that remained was hearing her answer. No matter what happened, he was determined to return to her. With that resolve, Haruchika accepted the mission and sealed the deal with the goddess. Only then did she finally stand up. After everything he had done to embarrass her, the goddess warned that she wouldn't accept any excuses once the mission began. Haruchika confidently accepted the challenge without the slightest hesitation. Relieved, the goddess returned to the main point. She formally entrusted the mission to Haruchika Isazuki, the Love Master. If he wanted to return to his own world, he had to restore love to the hearts of the 7 chosen girls. There was only one condition. He couldn't go home until every single one of them had fallen in love with him. With her explanation finished, the goddess announced that her role was over. She left the rest to Jibril and disappeared before the fairy could even respond. Jibril could only sigh. Apparently, this kind of behavior was completely normal for the goddess. She then apologized to Haruchika for everything that had happened. Haruchika took it surprisingly well, and even wondered if Jibril had to deal with this all the time. Trying to stay positive, Jibril grabbed his hand and promised to support him throughout the entire mission. Haruchika accepted the offer but immediately asked her to stop calling him the Love Master. After a brief compromise, she simply began calling him Master instead. With introductions finally over, Haruchika asked what came next. Jibril answered with a smile. A teleportation circle suddenly appeared beneath them. Their first destination was the location of the first target. Moments later, they arrived high above another land. The instant Haruchika realized he was floating in the sky, panic immediately set in. Jibril calmly reassured him that he wasn't going to fall. From above, she pointed toward the Night Academy located in Mekil, the royal capital of the Filio Kingdom. The first target studied there. As Haruchika looked down at the fantasy-like world below, everything finally started to feel real. There were goddesses. There were angels. And now there was even a kingdom with a Night Academy. Jibril continued explaining the mission. The first girl was the youngest daughter of a powerful military noble family that ruled territory bordering the Demon King's domain. Her clan spent their everyday lives hunting monsters. Hearing that, Haruchika couldn't help wondering whether this was really supposed to be a simple romance mission. Jibril ignored the comment and moved on. She had already arranged everything. Haruchika would transfer into the academy as an exchange student from a neighboring country. Better yet, he would be placed in the exact same class as the target. His seat would even be right beside hers. Instead of feeling relieved, Haruchika became even more nervous. He knew absolutely nothing about the customs or common sense of this world. Jibril quickly reassured him that she would guide him the entire time. Since only Haruchika could see her, she could stay by his side without anyone noticing. Even with that reassurance, Haruchika still wasn't completely convinced everything would go smoothly. Jibril then brought up the technique he had used on the goddess. She admitted it had been incredible and wondered why someone capable of that had chosen such a direct confession back on the school rooftop. Haruchika was caught off guard. He hadn't expected anyone to have witnessed that moment. Jibril admitted that she had been watching and apologized. Soon after, she carefully held on to him as they descended toward the ground. During the descent, Haruchika quietly reflected on the fact that Kiriyama had been his first love. Jibril noticed him mumbling but received no answer. Once they landed, both of them looked toward a nearby arena. A group of students was gathered around an intense sword match. One male student launched a powerful attack, but his opponent avoided the strike with ease. The female fighter instantly countered and defeated him in a single exchange. Jibril pointed toward the victorious girl. She was the first target, Lady Marion Bonet. At school, the professor announced that the class would be welcoming a transfer student. The room immediately filled with whispers. Everyone wondered why someone would transfer so late into the school year. Others became curious about what kind of person he might be. A moment later, the professor introduced the new student from a neighboring country. His name was Haruchika Isazaki. Haruchika calmly greeted the class. He explained that he would be studying with them from that day forward. Because of certain circumstances, his transfer had been delayed, and he hoped everyone would get along with him. The girls were instantly captivated. One admired how calm he looked. Another was impressed by his elegant manners. Someone even wondered if he was secretly a member of royalty traveling under a false identity. Exactly the impression Haruchika wanted. To him, first impressions meant everything. He had mastered the art of controlling how people saw him. A gentle smile. A soft voice. Slow, clear speech. Every detail was carefully calculated to make him appear kind, refined, and intelligent. The professor then looked around the classroom and called on Marion Bonet. After she raised her hand, Haruchika was directed to the empty seat beside her. As soon as he sat down, Marion welcomed him, and he politely returned the greeting. At first, Haruchika had imagined Marion would be some intimidating giant. Instead, she turned out to be an ordinary but very cute girl. Without wasting the opportunity, he secretly activated the appraisal skill Jibril had given him. Her information instantly appeared before his eyes. Occupation. Skills. And one more thing. An affection value. It was sitting at 0. Haruchika was surprised that the skill actually worked. If raising that number was all he needed, then maybe he could make some progress during the next break. Before long, the professor dismissed the class for the day. As everyone prepared to leave, Haruchika approached Marion and complimented the sword she was carrying, recognizing it as an exceptional masterpiece. The compliment immediately brightened her mood. She proudly revealed that she had designed the weapon herself before having the finest blacksmith in her territory forge it. Its appearance wasn't the only impressive part. Its sharpness was just as remarkable. Haruchika praised her excellent taste and pointed out that anyone capable of mastering such a weapon had to be incredibly skilled. Marion modestly brushed off the compliment, then suggested they simply call each other by their first names. To make things even friendlier, she casually patted him on the back. Haruchika felt confident he had figured it out. The fastest way into someone's inner circle was simple. Find what they were proud of. Let them talk about it. Agree with them. Praise them. The affection value should naturally increase. Marion even became visibly embarrassed after learning that Haruchika had been watching her earlier. Watching everything unfold, Jibril couldn't hide her amazement. The so-called master of love was living up to his reputation. Then lunchtime arrived. Instead of celebrating, Haruchika was completely frustrated. Despite everything that had happened with Marion, the affection value hadn't moved at all. Not even by a single point. Her reactions had looked perfect. She had seemed only a step or two away from completely falling for him. And yet, it was still 0. Jibril tried reassuring him that it was only the first day. That only made Haruchika more impatient. When he called out to Jibril, she became annoyed over the nickname he used, insisting that shortening her name would only cause trouble. Haruchika immediately shut that argument down. The only thing he cared about was whether the affection value was actually capable of changing. Jibril admitted she was certain it should move. However, seeing someone remain at 0 after all of that was something she had never witnessed before. That answer only made Haruchika even more irritated. With no clear explanation, he decided there was only one way to find the truth. He walked away, determined to test the system on someone else. Whether Marion was simply an unusual case or not, he would find out by trying the same approach on another girl. His next target was already standing in the hallway. Jibril immediately grew nervous, wondering if he really meant the intimidating-looking girl nearby. Without hesitation, Haruchika fixed his eyes on her. The girl quickly noticed his stare. And the moment their eyes met, the next test was about to begin. The next morning, Haruchika immediately checked the results of yesterday's experiment. The intimidating girl from the hallway now had an affection value of 100. She greeted him with obvious affection. She wasn't the only one. Girls from all over the school were drawn to him, and the moment Haruchika casually waved at one of them, she instantly blushed. As he looked around, he noticed the same pattern everywhere. Affection values were steadily rising across the board. Just as he suspected, Marion was the only exception. So that was what happened when someone's ability to love had been stolen away. Since yesterday afternoon, Haruchika had been testing the system on every girl he came across. A blonde girl reached an affection value of 89. A short-haired girl climbed to 87. Another reached 97. Every single test worked exactly as expected. In fact, girls who weren't emotionally jaded turned out to be surprisingly easy to win over. While Haruchika was lost in thought, Marion casually sat beside him and teased him about becoming incredibly popular overnight. He laughed it off and admitted that everyone had been very welcoming. Still, he claimed that the person he really wanted to get closer to was her. Marion simply smiled. Then she pointed out something unexpected. His smile looked fake. The comment hit Haruchika harder than he expected. Even after everything he had tried, Marion still hadn't reacted the way everyone else did. None of his carefully practiced techniques had worked. He needed a breakthrough. Even Jibril started panicking after realizing Marion's affection value hadn't budged in the slightest. Haruchika calmly brushed it off, admitting that his friends had told him the same thing before. Later, the class gathered at the training arena for sword practice. Haruchika was still thinking about Marion's strange condition. No matter how much he analyzed it, he couldn't figure out why she was different. Before he could think any further, Marion called his attention while holding a wooden sword. Getting distracted during training was the quickest way to get seriously hurt. Haruchika apologized before looking around the arena. Even if Marion was clearly one of the strongest students, everyone else also possessed incredibly high levels of skill. Since he had no real experience, he simply copied the stances he saw around him. The result was terrible. The moment Marion looked at him, she immediately recognized that he was a complete amateur. Haruchika insisted that wasn't true. Marion wasn't convinced for a second. She corrected his stance. Then, before he could even react, her wooden sword was already pointed right in front of him. Haruchika froze. He hadn't seen her move at all. Despite putting himself through intense physical conditioning just to become more attractive, and despite having confidence in his reflexes, Marion effortlessly proved him wrong. The gap between their abilities was overwhelming. Marion looked satisfied. There was no way someone with absolutely no swordsmanship experience could have passed the Royal Knight Academy's transfer exam. Haruchika clearly had his own reasons for being there. Before he could respond, a loud impact echoed across the arena. Haruchika quickly turned toward the sound. Several students were already lying unconscious on the ground. Another student was sent flying through the air. Haruchika stared in disbelief. One person was taking on 5 opponents at once. Marion explained that 5 against 1 was the only way anyone could even hope to challenge him. She then introduced the fighter, Dean McAllister, the strongest student in the night class. Another student rushed in to attack him. Dean effortlessly dodged the strike before delivering a crushing counterattack. His opponent was blown away in a single hit. Against someone at that level, the rest of the students didn't stand a chance. Everyone in the arena stared in disbelief. Even Haruchika was stunned. Dean wasn't just strong. He was on an entirely different level. After dealing with every opponent, Dean turned his attention to Marion and walked straight toward her. He calmly pressured her to make up her mind. In his eyes, agreeing to marry someone as unrefined as her was already a generous offer. Marion immediately shut him down. She had never agreed to any of it. If he wanted someone more feminine, he could simply look elsewhere. Dean didn't argue. He quietly turned around and walked away. Confused, Haruchika asked why Dean kept referring to Marion as his future wife. Marion let out a sigh before revealing the truth. Dean was already her fiancé. The engagement had been arranged by their families. Haruchika couldn't hide his surprise. Marion explained that the Bonite family valued strength above everything else, and since Dean was exceptionally powerful, both families had decided on the marriage without asking for her opinion. Only one condition remained. Dean had to prove he was stronger than her in battle. If he won, the marriage would officially move forward. The problem was, Marion had no intention of getting married. Her dream was to become a knight. Because of that, she kept refusing to fight him. She knew she was only delaying the inevitable. Haruchika wondered if victory was truly impossible for her. The question immediately struck a nerve. Marion snapped. Even an amateur like Haruchika could tell just by looking that she had no chance against Dean. At that exact moment, Haruchika noticed a strange notification. The affection value had changed. Not upward. Downward. So it could even become negative. The following morning, Marion arrived at school avoiding everyone around her. She quietly sat beside Haruchika without saying a word. Haruchika greeted her with a cheerful good morning. She completely ignored him. Jibril immediately panicked. Marion's affection value had dropped below 0. Her opinion of Haruchika had completely crashed. Instead of backing down, Haruchika decided to test another theory. He pointed out that refusing to fight Dean because she didn't want to get married was basically losing by forfeit. Marion immediately argued that she hadn't lost. Haruchika continued pushing. The engagement was simply an agreement between two families. If she hated being labeled a loser by default, then she should fight him already. Maybe marriage wouldn't even be that bad. Maybe settling down, having children, and living a peaceful life would actually make her happy. That was the final straw. Marion grabbed Haruchika by the collar. Her anger exploded. Becoming a knight was her dream. The idea of giving up that dream just to get married and raise children was utterly disgusting to her. She would rather die than accept a future like that. Instead of panicking, Haruchika smiled. The word disgusting confirmed everything. Someone without the ability to experience romantic feelings would naturally reject the idea of marriage and having children. Just as he expected, Marion's affection value dropped even further. -50. Jibril nearly lost it. The score had fallen another 10 points overnight. Marion had probably spent the entire night becoming even more annoyed with him. She desperately shook Haruchika, unable to understand what he was trying to accomplish. By this point, Marion hated him. Haruchika remained completely calm. As far as he was concerned, everything was going exactly according to plan. There was no reason to worry, because falling in love could happen in an instant. In the classroom, Marion's affection level dropped to -99. She immediately got angry after noticing Haruchika looking her way. He brushed it off without hesitation, insisting he wasn't staring at her at all and thinking she was way too full of herself. At the same time, he became curious whether -99 was the lowest the affection meter could possibly go. Jibril, however, completely panicked. -99 wasn't just hatred anymore. It meant Marion had reached the point of genuine murderous intent. Even so, Haruchika stayed calm. Everything had already been set up. All that remained was the final trigger, leaving Jibril completely confused. Then, right on cue, Dean stormed into the classroom. His face was filled with rage as he slammed a letter onto Haruchika's desk. Marion quickly recognized it as a formal challenge. Haruchika revealed that Marion's family planned to marry her off to the strongest man they could find. Since Dean seemed to be the obvious choice, Haruchika decided to interfere. That only made Marion even angrier. She couldn't understand why Haruchika kept involving himself in something that had nothing to do with him, making his behavior feel even creepier than before. Dean didn't care about any of that. He admitted his interest in Marion and mocked Haruchika for getting involved. Haruchika remained unfazed, making it clear he had never asked for any favors in the first place. With that, Dean officially challenged him to a duel 7 days later, promising to crush him completely. The moment the challenge became official, Marion's affection level dropped once again. -100. Haruchika immediately realized -99 hadn't been the limit after all. Marion was beyond furious. Haruchika explained that since Marion clearly didn't want to marry Dean yet kept delaying the situation, he decided to fight in her place as her representative. Instead of appreciating it, Marion completely lost her temper. Haruchika confidently insisted that if he won, she wouldn't have to marry Dean at all. Marion couldn't believe he actually thought he could win. Haruchika casually pointed out that even if he lost, Marion could simply claim the defeat wasn't hers. That ridiculous logic pushed her over the edge. She grabbed him by the collar while the entire classroom watched the chaos unfold. The surrounding students immediately began gossiping, wondering what Haruchika had done this time, especially after seeing him arguing with Marion from the powerful McAllister family. Still wearing a grin, Haruchika proposed another outrageous idea. If Marion truly wasn't satisfied, then she should personally train him for the next 7 days until he could actually beat Dean. The suggestion left Marion completely speechless. Not long afterward, the brutal training began inside the arena. Haruchika barely stayed on his feet before collapsing, but Marion showed absolutely no sympathy. She immediately pushed him to get back up. Haruchika pointed out that losing by default would happen only if he ran away or couldn't fight at all, so there was no reason to kill him during training. Marion wasn't interested in excuses. Only 1 week remained before the duel, and if Dean didn't kill him, she looked ready to do it herself. Haruchika could only beg for a little mercy. 2 days passed, and the training only became harsher. The moment Haruchika hit the ground again, Marion was already standing over him with her sword, refusing to let him rest for even a second. She kept pushing him because his only real chance of victory would come from catching Dean off guard with a lightning-fast opening strike. Haruchika accepted every instruction. Deep down, though, none of this was about winning the duel. His real goal was still returning to his original world. Unfortunately, there were no convenient cheat items waiting to hand him an easy victory. Jibril couldn't understand why he remained so calm when winning wasn't even his true objective. Haruchika ignored her thoughts as Marion continued driving him harder than ever. Day after day, the training never stopped. Before long, the promised week finally arrived. Despite all the punishment, Haruchika had trained relentlessly, and Marion had personally pushed him every step of the way. Back at the Bonite family estate, Marion soaked quietly in her bath. A heavy sigh escaped her. If Haruchika lost the duel, there would be no excuse left to give her father. At that point, she really would kill that worthless idiot herself. Her thoughts drifted back to her father's reaction after hearing about the duel. He had already learned everything the very next day. Since Marion had accepted a proxy duel, he decided he would personally attend the match as well. After leaving the bath and getting ready, Marion reflected on the past week. The training schedule had been absolutely brutal, yet they somehow made it through. To her surprise, Haruchika had far more determination than she expected. Now, everything would be decided in the arena. The day of the duel finally arrived. The announcer welcomed the roaring crowd, building excitement for Dean McAllister's long-awaited match. Dean confidently stepped forward, acting as though everyone should be grateful to witness such a one-sided spectacle. Meanwhile, Marion silently watched from the stands. Haruchika didn't actually need to win. But if he failed to make it look like he was genuinely trying, his entire plan would fall apart. Before the fight began, the announcer explained that the arena was protected by powerful magic that turned otherwise fatal attacks into non-lethal ones. The rules were simple. The match would end the moment either fighter landed what would normally be a killing blow. With that, the duel officially began. Haruchika immediately made his move. His opening attack was everything. His blade sliced across Dean's waist, drawing blood and leaving behind a visible scar. Haruchika couldn't even tell whether the strike had landed well enough. Dean stared at the wound with an angry frown. The entire arena fell silent. Then his expression twisted with rage. In an instant, he charged forward and slammed into Haruchika with overwhelming force. Haruchika was launched through the air before crashing hard onto the arena floor. Even Marion was stunned. Blood quickly spilled from Haruchika's injuries. Dean had originally planned to end the fight with a single blow. But after being wounded, he changed his mind. Now he wanted Haruchika to suffer first. Even while lying in a pool of blood, Haruchika smiled. As long as he stayed conscious, the plan was still alive. He forced himself back onto his feet. That reaction only fueled Dean's anger even further. Another attack came rushing in. This time, Haruchika barely managed to dodge. His first strike had never been meant to finish the fight. It existed for one reason only: to provoke Dean. Winning the duel didn't matter. His real objective was making Marion fall for him again. Dean easily avoided Haruchika's next attack before driving a brutal punch straight into his face. Jibril and Marion watched in disbelief. The crowd quickly grew frustrated. To them, this wasn't even a proper fight anymore. Boos echoed across the arena as people mocked Haruchika and urged him to give up. Even Marion started believing they were right. There was simply no path to victory anymore. Yet Haruchika refused to stay down. He struggled back to his feet once again. Dean laughed at the sight, mocking Haruchika for risking everything over someone like Marion. Haruchika immediately rejected that idea. Before he could recover, Dean closed the distance again. He was simply too fast. Another crushing punch landed squarely across Haruchika's face. Dean wasn't trying to end the match anymore. He was enjoying every second of it. The crowd fed into the cruelty, loudly cheering for Dean to finish him off. Marion watched in silence. She couldn't understand why Haruchika kept pushing himself so desperately. Even with her father carefully observing everything from the audience, Haruchika still refused to fall. Despite facing impossible odds, something unexpected began happening inside the arena. Watching someone continue fighting no matter how hopeless the situation became made people want to see him succeed. Even the spectators who had mocked him moments earlier couldn't believe he was still standing. Haruchika recognized exactly what was happening. It was the underdog effect. People naturally wanted to cheer for the weaker fighter who refused to give up. As Marion watched him struggle to his feet again and again, her eyes slowly began to fill with tears. And she wasn't immune to that effect either. Tears streamed down Marion's face. She couldn't stop thinking about how Haruchika had once told her to simply give up and marry Dean. So why was he risking everything for her now? Then the impossible finally happened. The girl who hated him more than anyone started cheering for him. As Haruchika charged forward, Marion shouted his name across the arena. At that exact moment, her feelings and her actions collided. The contradiction became too great for her mind to ignore. To resolve that conflict, everything flipped at once. Marion desperately cheered for Haruchika to win. Jibril watched in complete shock as Marion's affection level instantly jumped. From -100 to +100. At the same time, Dean's attention shifted toward Marion. That single moment of distraction was all Haruchika needed. He rushed in without hesitation and landed a clean blow straight to Dean's head. Dean collapsed. Haruchika stood there gasping for air, barely believing what had just happened. Moments later, the announcer officially declared him the winner. The entire arena was left speechless. No one had expected Dean McAllister to lose. Ironically, Haruchika had never needed to win the duel in the first place. His real objective had already been achieved the moment Marion called out his name. Dean's defeat was simply an unexpected bonus. As Dean lost consciousness, Marion hurried straight toward Haruchika. Without thinking twice, she threw her arms around him in a tight embrace. Haruchika didn't even realize what was happening at first. Jibril was just as stunned. She couldn't understand how Marion's affection level had suddenly reached 100. Haruchika smiled. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. What he used on Marion was something known as the Benjamin Franklin effect. Curious, Jibril asked what that meant. Haruchika explained that the effect was named after the American politician Benjamin Franklin, who famously used this psychological principle to win over one of his political opponents. People naturally want their actions and emotions to stay consistent. When Marion cheered for someone she believed she hated, her mind experienced cognitive dissonance. Rather than allowing that contradiction to remain, her emotions changed to match her actions. In simple terms, because she cheered for Haruchika, her brain convinced itself that she actually liked him. Her entire perception of him changed. That had been Haruchika's gamble from the very beginning. Since raising her affection normally wasn't possible, he pushed it all the way down until the emotional rebound became powerful enough to flip everything at once. Jibril could only stare at him in amazement. She expected nothing less from him. Haruchika proudly accepted the praise. Just then, Marion answered with his name, mistakenly thinking he had been talking to her. Haruchika casually brushed it off. Still overflowing with happiness, Marion sincerely thanked him. Haruchika insisted he didn't deserve her gratitude. Then, before anyone could react, Marion suddenly kissed him. The entire arena froze in shock. A bright blush spread across Marion's face as she admitted it had been her very first kiss. It was Haruchika's first kiss too. Hearing that made Marion even happier. To her, there couldn't have been a better person for her first kiss than the man she loved. Then she casually referred to him as her husband. Haruchika's eyes immediately widened. Before he could correct her, Marion cut him off. There was no taking it back now. She had already fallen completely in love with him. Now he had to take responsibility. Already thinking ahead, Marion excitedly talked about convincing the Bonite family to accept their relationship. For that to happen, Haruchika would have to become even stronger than she was. Haruchika stood there completely speechless. His plan had succeeded, but it looked like he might have pushed it a little too far. At school, Haruchika called Marion over, wondering what had gotten into her. According to Jibril, yesterday's duel ended in total victory, and Marion's affection had officially reached the maximum. That explained everything. Marion clung to Haruchika without the slightest bit of hesitation, completely fascinated by his perfectly sculpted face. Haruchika could barely believe what was happening. Even while carrying her, he couldn't get her to stop acting so affectionate. She insisted she was paying attention. In fact, she casually admitted that she was probably flirting. Unfortunately for Haruchika, their classmates were watching every second of it. The whispers spread across the school, leaving him completely stressed out. He tried to remind Marion that everyone was staring. But Marion saw it differently. The reason everyone was watching was because Haruchika had defeated McAllister. Overnight, he had become one of the most desirable marriage candidates among the noble ladies. Haruchika brushed it off as an exaggeration, but Marion quickly shut that down. She insisted he needed more self-awareness. To keep other girls away, she decided to make one thing perfectly clear. Haruchika belonged to her. Naturally, the girls watching from a distance were furious. Then, Marion unexpectedly started listing all of Haruchika's flaws. She admitted she knew nothing about his background. She called him weak, arrogant, and impossible to deal with. But there was one thing she rated unbelievably high. His love for her. Haruchika could only sigh. Every category was brutally low, except for that one. Marion immediately challenged him, forcing Haruchika to admit she was completely right. Then the conversation took another unexpected turn. Marion revealed that the Boni family, especially her father, had a strong preference for McAllister. If Haruchika wanted to earn his approval, they would need some kind of trick. And Marion already had one in mind. Her solution was to skip straight to having a child and force the marriage to happen. Haruchika nearly lost it. In his mind, she had skipped from planting the seed to harvesting the crops in record time. It was so fast that he wondered if she was growing bean sprouts. But Marion completely misunderstood the comparison and innocently focused on the planting part instead, making Haruchika bury his face in his hand. At that point, he couldn't help but wonder if her personality had completely changed. Marion admitted that she was acting differently, but not because she had become someone else. She simply felt overwhelmed with happiness. For so long, marriage had felt like an impossible dream. Now it suddenly felt real. Before the conversation could get any crazier, their professor interrupted them and reminded them that class was about to begin. Haruchika quickly apologized, and both of them headed inside. When class finally ended, the two walked through the campus together. Marion suggested stopping somewhere before heading home. Haruchika casually brought up the idea of going on a date. The suggestion completely caught Marion off guard. It would be her very first after-school date. She had never imagined herself experiencing something like that, and the excitement was so overwhelming that she couldn't stop blushing. She happily rushed him to get moving, practically pulling him along. Soon, they arrived in the royal capital, Merkle City. As Haruchika watched Marion happily looking around, he realized she was acting exactly like a normal girl her age. She laughed, played around, and couldn't hide her excitement. For the first time, he simply found her incredibly cute. Their date led them to a small food stall after Marion eagerly pointed out something she wanted to try. She enjoyed every bite with pure excitement, eating so enthusiastically that she nearly choked. Haruchika instantly panicked. Fortunately, she recovered almost immediately. Seeing his worried reaction made Marion smile, and before long, the two of them were laughing together. After finishing their meal, the two continued exploring the city together. As they wandered through the streets, Marion suddenly stopped in front of a jewelry shop. She quietly admired one particular necklace for a moment, but eventually walked away without buying it. Their date ended at a scenic overlook that gave them a breathtaking view of the entire town. Haruchika couldn't help but admire the view. Marion agreed. The scenery was beautiful, but more importantly, she admitted that she had genuinely enjoyed the entire day. Hearing that made Haruchika smile. Then he reached out his hand. At first, Marion looked confused. But resting in his palm was the very same necklace she had been staring at earlier. Haruchika had secretly bought it after noticing how much she liked it. The surprise completely melted Marion's heart. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him before asking him to put the necklace on for her himself. Haruchika awkwardly fastened the clasp behind her neck, struggling a little before finally getting it right. Marion couldn't help teasing him for being so clumsy. Haruchika simply admitted that he wasn't used to doing something like this. That answer made Marion blush even more. For the first time, she realized that loving someone wasn't just excitement. It was a warm feeling that filled her heart. After their date, Haruchika walked Marion home. She thanked him for the wonderful day before happily heading inside, promising to see him again tomorrow. As she disappeared, Jibril proudly congratulated Haruchika for everything he had accomplished. Then Jibril reminded him of something important. Even if Marion's memories were erased later, the happiness she experienced today would remain buried deep inside her heart. Every time she fell in love again, those feelings would naturally guide her back. Then Jibril presented another option. If Haruchika truly wanted to, they didn't have to erase Marion's memories at all. They could return after completing the remaining missions and continue their relationship. For a brief moment, Haruchika remembered why he had started this journey in the first place. Back in his old world, his classmates constantly mocked him. They laughed because he always ranked below the top student and treated him like a creepy nobody. Only one person had ever defended him: Sakura. She believed his achievements came from facing every challenge without running away. To her, that determination was something worth admiring. Those words changed his entire life. From that day forward, Haruchika pushed himself beyond his limits. He gave everything he had. Eventually, the impossible happened. His classmates stopped laughing. Instead, they praised him. He became incredibly popular. But none of that ever mattered. He had changed for one person alone. The girl he believed was his destined partner. After reaching the top, he finally confessed his feelings and asked her out. Returning to the present, Haruchika admitted that Jibril's offer was tempting. But his home wasn't in this world. And his answer would never change. Meanwhile, Marion was back in the arena. She faced 3 opponents at once and defeated them one after another with overwhelming strength. The last fighter surrendered without hesitation, bringing the match to an end. The spectators were left speechless. Everyone agreed that Marion Boney was just as powerful as ever. Some even talked about her broken engagement with McAllister. Others noticed something different. Despite being as strong as ever, she somehow seemed much gentler than before. High above the arena, Haruchika quietly watched everything from a distance. Then, with one final look, he silently said goodbye to Marion. At that exact moment, Marion suddenly paused. She looked around without knowing why. For a split second, it felt like she had heard someone's voice. As Haruchika and Jibril vanished from that world, Jibril immediately shifted their attention to the next mission. The next target was waiting in the country's third largest city, the bustling port town of Kurtenberg. There, a new girl awaited them, Lily Fafner, a beast woman receptionist working at the local adventurers guild. Curious, Haruchika asked how beast men were treated in this world. Jibril explained that it wasn't much different from racial prejudice in his own world. Some people accepted them, while others looked down on them. Beast men originally came from the northern mountains, making Lily an unusual sight in a southern port city like Kurtenberg. Even so, she wasn't just another receptionist. The guild master had personally brought her from the capital because of her outstanding abilities. Haruchika immediately started preparing himself. If she turned out to be another arrogant troublemaker, winning her over would actually be easier. But Jibril quickly shut that idea down. Lily wasn't like that at all. She wasn't even assigned to any adventurers anymore. Haruchika found that strange. Jibril revealed the reason. Every rookie adventurer assigned to Lily had died one after another. Because of that, everyone gave her a cruel nickname, Miss Death. Haruchika couldn't believe it. The idea that she was cursed with bad luck sounded completely ridiculous to him. If she had been isolated and pushed into a corner because of that rumor, then she would be an easy target to approach. Jibril couldn't help pointing out just how terrible that sounded. Before long, the two arrived at the Adventurers Guild. Haruchika took a deep breath. The next capture mission had officially begun. The moment he stepped inside, several staff members noticed the unfamiliar face. Lily also spotted him, quietly assuming he was a brand new adventurer. One receptionist welcomed him and asked if it was his first time registering. Haruchika confirmed it and asked where to sign up. As the receptionist guided him through the process, he suddenly stopped and asked an unexpected question. If he registered there, would she become his assigned receptionist? She confirmed that she would. But Haruchika politely refused. Instead, he pointed directly at Lily. He claimed that if he had to see the same receptionist almost every day, he wanted someone who matched his type instead. The receptionist stood there completely speechless. After asking if she really wasn't his type, Haruchika bluntly admitted that she wasn't. The rejection instantly made her lose her temper. Before things could calm down, several adventurers gathered around Haruchika. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. He had rejected the guild's most popular receptionist, Kayla, just to choose Lily. They immediately warned him about her reputation. Lily was known as Miss Death. Every rookie she represented had died without exception. Everyone believed she carried an unavoidable curse. Hearing those words, Lily quietly lowered her head. But Haruchika remained completely unfazed. If breaking that so-called curse was all it took, then the problem was already solved. His confidence left both Lily and the surrounding adventurers stunned. One of the men angrily insisted they were only trying to protect him. Haruchika dismissed the warning as nothing more than people sticking their noses into someone else's business. Then he walked straight toward Lily. Extending his hand, he declared that she was the only receptionist he wanted. Lily hesitated. She had heard this kind of confidence before. Every adventurer claimed they would survive. Every single one of them ended up dead. Haruchika's answer never changed. If he died, only then would she have a reason to fall into despair. Until that happened, there was nothing to worry about. His overwhelming confidence left Lily speechless. She couldn't believe someone could be so unbelievably arrogant. Haruchika simply smiled. That was exactly what made it exciting. After a long pause, Lily finally accepted his decision. She reminded him not to blame her if anything happened. Then, with a small smile, she told him to start by filling out the registration forms. Meanwhile, Kayla and the other adventurers could only watch in disbelief and frustration. As they left the Adventurers Guild, Jibril happily declared that their first meeting with Lily had been a success. Haruchika agreed. But something was bothering him. Jibril quickly noticed and asked what was on his mind. Haruchika explained that before leaving the guild, he had secretly used his appraisal skill. Lily's affection level had increased. That surprised Jibril. Compared to what happened with Marion, the result was completely different. Haruchika pointed out the difference. Nothing he did with Marion had directly raised her relationship value. But with Lily, the affection was increasing little by little. That made him realize something. Without even noticing, he had been using techniques designed to increase a girl's affection. According to Haruchika, people naturally place each other into invisible social hierarchies. By publicly rejecting another receptionist and openly choosing Lily instead, he had unintentionally elevated her status in front of everyone. In his experience, that kind of move worked surprisingly well. People naturally developed positive feelings when they realized they had been chosen over someone else. Jibril immediately wondered if Haruchika had accidentally targeted the wrong girl. Haruchika denied it. He was certain Lily was the correct target. The situation simply worked differently than it had with Marion. Jibril admitted that made sense, then pointed out that everything seemed to be progressing normally. Haruchika hoped she was right. Changing the subject, he looked over his first quest. As expected, it was gathering herbs. He couldn't help laughing at how perfectly it matched every isekai cliché. Then he remembered the goddess behind all of this. Jibril quickly reminded him that she was still technically a divine being and deserved at least a little respect. Ignoring that, Haruchika reviewed the mission. Half a day's walk west of Kurtoberg, a forest contained the medicinal herbs he needed. The request was simple. Collect 20 stalks. Jibril wondered why he intended to complete such a basic quest when she could simply create as many herbs as he wanted. Haruchika lightly poked her nose. She had completely missed the point. Right now, the goal wasn't efficiency. It was building trust. If he cheated now, the truth would eventually come out. And girls, according to Haruchika, were surprisingly good at noticing things like that. The following day, Haruchika returned to the Adventurers Guild. While waiting at the counter, Kayla confronted Lily. She reminded Lily that she had promised never to represent another adventurer again, then mocked her by claiming beastmen couldn't keep their word. Lily quietly denied it. She explained that she had only made that promise because she never wanted anyone else to suffer because of her. But Haruchika had chosen her himself. He had confidently promised that he would never die. So, she wanted to believe him. Kayla could only shake her head. She warned Lily not to regret trusting someone so reckless. After all, despite all of Haruchika's confidence, he was still a complete beginner. His rank was the lowest possible. The only quest available to him was simple herb gathering. Kayla couldn't help laughing at the irony. Even Lily looked a little surprised by that fact. Before she could say anything else, Haruchika walked through the door. He had returned. The moment Lily saw him, she rushed over in a panic. She immediately checked whether he was injured, asking if anything hurt or if he felt unwell. Haruchika calmly reassured her that he was perfectly fine. Relief instantly spread across Lily's face. Inside Jibril's mind, however, the truth was very different. The herb field had been growing on the edge of a steep cliff. Haruchika had nearly fallen to his death. Only Jibril's magic had secretly saved him by making him float back to safety. Lily's legs nearly gave out from relief. The thought of Haruchika getting hurt had terrified her. Haruchika laughed it off, insisting she was worrying too much. Lily firmly disagreed. To her, she wasn't exaggerating at all. Watching how genuinely concerned she was, Haruchika expected her affection value to have increased significantly. Confidently, he activated his appraisal skill. Then he froze. The number displayed was still 0. The result was so unexpected that he burst out laughing. Lily stared at him in complete confusion, wondering what had suddenly happened. Haruchika quickly apologized and brushed it off. Lily simply accepted the answer. Even though she still had no idea what was so funny, Haruchika couldn't believe what he was seeing. After everything that happened, he was still wondering if he had done something that made Lily dislike him. Determined to figure it out, he held out his hand and asked for a private favor. It was something he wanted to discuss with her, but not where anyone else could overhear. Lily suggested using the lounge instead. But Haruchika gently shifted the idea. He invited her to dinner that night instead. While bringing it up, he casually asked if she knew any good restaurants because eating alone felt lonely. Lily hesitated for a moment. Her schedule was free, but she still looked unsure. Then that single comment changed everything. A faint blush spread across her face. She gave in, finished exchanging the herbs first, and asked him to wait. Haruchika happily agreed and took a seat. Watching from the sidelines, Jibril couldn't understand what had just happened. Lily had accepted the dinner invitation almost effortlessly. Haruchika revealed that it wasn't luck. According to him, girls naturally enjoy teaching others. Recommending a good restaurant lets them feel helpful while satisfying their instinct to guide someone. It was one of the easiest conversations to start. But that wasn't the real trick. The real goal was making himself look like someone who needed help. By admitting that eating alone felt lonely, he placed himself under Lily's protective instincts. And once someone started wanting to protect him, affection naturally began to grow. The proof appeared immediately. Lily's affection value had already climbed to 15. A little later, Lily finished her work and thanked him for waiting. Haruchika casually complimented her, mentioning that simply watching her had made the time fly. The unexpected praise left her flustered. As they left together, Kalea silently watched Lily for a while. The two headed to a restaurant, shared dinner, and spent the evening talking. Afterward, they wandered through the streets together. With every passing moment, the affection value kept rising. Even Jibril was stunned. By the end of the night, Lily's affection had already reached 70. The next morning, Jibril was still amazed. Lily's affection had ended above 70, and at that pace, winning her over completely seemed like only a matter of time. Haruchika agreed without hesitation. After spending an entire evening alone with her, he was convinced there was no way things could suddenly go wrong. They returned to the guild with complete confidence. Lily greeted him warmly and thanked him again for dinner. Everything seemed perfect. Until Haruchika checked her affection value. His confidence shattered in an instant. The number had completely reset. The impossible sight left him frozen before his legs finally gave out beneath him. Haruchika was completely stunned. Just yesterday, Lily's affection had definitely reached 70. Yet somehow, it had fallen all the way back to 0. Meanwhile, Lily greeted him with a warm smile and looked forward to helping him again that day, as if nothing had happened. Haruchika couldn't stop thinking about it. As they walked, Lily began explaining the mission. The dungeon had already been cleared long ago, but if it was left alone, monsters would eventually start appearing again. Because of that, the guild regularly sent adventurers to wipe them out. Only goblins spawned there, making it the perfect assignment for a beginner. But Haruchika barely heard any of it. His mind was focused on the affection value. During their date, the increase had clearly slowed once it reached 70. That could only mean one thing. Her affection dropped whenever they were apart. Noticing that he wasn't paying attention, Lily let out a quiet sigh. Her confidence immediately crumbled as she convinced herself that nothing she said was worth listening to. Haruchika instantly corrected her. To prove he had been listening, he repeated everything she had explained. The dungeon was already cleared, but goblins continued spawning, so the guild needed people to eliminate them. Relief washed over Lily's face. She continued her explanation, reminding him that even a beginner's dungeon was still dangerous. Unlike gathering herbs, this mission carried real risks, and he needed to prepare properly. At the same time, Haruchika formed another theory. Maybe her affection wasn't disappearing because she disliked him. Maybe her self-esteem was simply so low that whenever she was alone, negative thoughts erased all the progress they had made together. It sounded completely possible. Trying to lighten the mood, Haruchika teased her for worrying so much, just like she had the day before. Instead of laughing, Lily's eyes filled with tears. She desperately denied being a worrywart. She genuinely believed the dungeon was dangerous. Haruchika reassured her, but Lily continued pleading with him. She even admitted she wouldn't care if he failed the mission or ran away. The only thing that mattered was that he came back alive. Haruchika couldn't help laughing. Hearing a guild employee practically encourage failure felt a little ironic. But Lily wasn't joking. She was completely serious. Realizing how worried she truly was, Haruchika promised that he would return safely. All he wanted in return was for her to send him off with a smile. After finally calming down, Lily wished him good luck. With that, they said goodbye, and Haruchika headed toward the dungeon. On the way, Jibril started piecing everything together. Even though Marion and Lily had both lost their romantic feelings, the effects seemed completely different for each person. So far, they had only seen 2 cases, but the contrast was obvious. Marion's affection never increased at all. Lily, on the other hand, could grow attached to him, but the moment they separated, those feelings quickly faded away. Jibril suggested using the same strategy that had worked on Marion. Haruchika immediately dismissed the idea. Marion had an incredibly strong personality with clear likes and dislikes. Winning her over required proving himself stronger. Lily was the exact opposite. With someone whose self-esteem was that low, even something as extreme as eliminating the source of her emotional dependence probably wouldn't stop her affection from sinking into the negatives. So his strategy had to change. The only realistic option was increasing the amount of time they spent together. At the same time, Lily's desperate behavior and the mysterious nickname, Miss Death, continued bothering him. For now, though, there was a more immediate problem. The goblins. Haruchika admitted he would rather avoid fighting them if possible. Jibril reminded him that goblins were weak monsters. But that wasn't the issue. Growing up in modern Japan, Haruchika had never killed anything before. And killing a creature that looked almost human was a completely different experience. Jibril found that surprising. She had always imagined that people reincarnated into fantasy worlds happily rushed off to hunt monsters. Haruchika saw it very differently. Anyone who could do that without hesitation had to be a little messed up. A short while later, they finally reached the dungeon. It looked exactly like something straight out of a fantasy adventure. A large warning sign stood at the entrance, declaring that death lay ahead and that entering without an official guild request was strictly forbidden. After stepping inside, Jibril explained that only goblins lived on the first underground floor. Their job was simply to patrol the area and eliminate everyone they found. Haruchika looked around in surprise. The dungeon was much brighter than he expected. Jibril explained that since it had already been fully explored, magical lighting had been installed throughout the tunnels, making the entire place easy to navigate. A sudden noise echoed through the dungeon. Haruchika immediately became alert, but he couldn't spot any danger. Then Jibril suddenly panicked, warning him to stop and watch where he was stepping. Haruchika brushed it off, asking what was wrong while telling her to lower her voice. A split second later, he almost plunged straight into a massive pit. Fortunately, Jibril grabbed him just in time. It had been way too close. Looking down, Jibril realized it was an old pitfall trap that had already been triggered. The hole was so deep that even she couldn't see the bottom. Haruchika pointed out that if the trap had already gone off, someone had probably fallen into it before. Jibril agreed. A moment later, she spotted movement ahead. 2 goblins. Haruchika couldn't see them at all, but Jibril explained that her eyesight was exceptionally sharp because she was an angel. Haruchika couldn't help pointing out that being an angel had nothing to do with eyesight. Even so, he drew his sword and cautiously moved forward. As he got closer, the 2 goblins finally came into view. Before either monster could react, Haruchika struck first. The first goblin fell instantly. The second followed just as quickly. Jibril was amazed by how cleanly he handled the fight. Haruchika felt relieved, but taking a life still left an unpleasant feeling in his chest. Before he could recover, Jibril sensed something else. Someone was approaching. Not just from the front, but from behind as well. Haruchika immediately tensed up. He questioned how she could possibly know that when nobody was visible. Jibril explained that she could hear footsteps with her incredibly sensitive hearing. Haruchika jokingly wondered if those were devil ears instead of angel ears. The joke disappeared almost instantly. Haruchika realized there could be other people inside the dungeon. Maybe another group had accepted the same extermination request. Then shadowy figures wearing cloaks emerged with swords in hand. Even Jibril started panicking. These people weren't simply passing through. Haruchika shouted at them, demanding to know who they were. The answer came in the form of drawn blades. They attacked without hesitation. At that critical moment, Haruchika remembered Marian's brutal training. She had mocked him for being tough enough to survive but lacking any real combat experience. She had called him overly timid and warned that constantly flinching would only get him killed. Her harsh lessons had been painful, but now they finally paid off. Haruchika took one deep breath. No more hesitation. He charged forward. One attacker after another fell beneath his sword and kicks. Everything Marian had drilled into him flowed naturally into the battle. By the time the fighting paused, Haruchika was completely out of breath. One terrifying realization hit him. These people had genuinely intended to kill him. Even so, they weren't anywhere near Marian's or McAllister's level. Individually, they weren't especially dangerous. But there were too many of them. Sooner or later, the numbers would overwhelm him. As he searched for a way out, an idea suddenly appeared. Jibril offered to teleport them away immediately. Haruchika refused. Instead, he carefully watched their enemies before quietly whispering his plan to Jibril. She understood it at once. The plan began. Haruchika charged straight at one attacker. During the exchange, another swordsman slashed across his back, leaving a deep wound. Ignoring the pain, Haruchika pushed straight through their formation and kept running. The attackers chased after him. Jibril warned that they were almost at the right spot. Haruchika reminded her not to mess up the timing. Then both of them leaped straight into the pitfall. The cloaked attackers burst into laughter. From their perspective, Haruchika had made the biggest mistake possible. Anyone who fell into that bottomless trap was as good as dead. But they had no idea what really happened. The instant they disappeared into the darkness, Jibril activated her teleportation. In the blink of an eye, both of them landed safely on a bed inside a room. Haruchika quickly looked around, asking where they were. Jibril happily confirmed that they had made it back to an inn in Kurtoberg. The teleport had activated at the perfect moment. Haruchika finally let out a long breath. That escape had been far too close for comfort. It was the kind of job that felt like it required a dozen extra lives. Jibril then asked the question that had been bothering her. Why wait until they were already falling? Teleporting immediately would have been much safer. Haruchika had a reason. He needed those attackers to believe he had died inside that pit. Because during that desperate escape, he had finally discovered a way to win Lily over.